to ask Dr. Martin to speak.
First of all, thank you for giving me this opportunity. But let me try and also reflect quite a bit on what has been said, but not too much, but also raise two very significant issues. The first one is my experience. And we've got so many stories of bad experience of the passports that we have. I remember, I think it was roughly about 20 years ago when I had my Kenyan passport, which I still have, and I was using it to travel within Europe. And because I used to travel from one country to another, every time I would travel from one destination to the other by flying in, I would wait on the queue and people would pass me and so forth. So I decided every time I fly in, I don't come out of the plane until everyone has left, because I will not wait so much at the queue. And there are so many other stories that you can reflect with the type of passports that we have. But let me try and just turn this thing on its head, because we keep blaming probably the wrong person and asking ourselves, why are we not allowed to travel to one country to another with an ease of visas and stuff like that? But I think it comes down to the country. Sorry? It comes down to the country.
Anna, please wait for Dr. Martin to speak, and then you'll have a chance to speak. Dr. Martin, please proceed.
Thank you. So it comes down to the country where we are coming from, or the country of origin. Passports, whether they're strong or weak, depending on how you look at them, they're always based on specific parameters. So you'd find, on one hand, it will either be the political and the economic environment of the country of origin. A good example is, I think there are some league tables that are published all the time, I think every year. If you have a German passport, you're more likely to go to roughly about nearly 80% of most of the countries without any problem, compared to some of the African passports where you can only travel to something like 10%, and most likely those will be in Africa. If you have a Singaporean passport, it's the same. And if you have even a Japanese passport, is also the same, where you can travel to very many places without even having to pay for visas. And the question really comes back to the way countries are, the political stability, the economics, the way the countries are economically run. That also determines how and what factors countries will consider to allow your citizens to enter those countries without visas or with specific visas. There's also what we call the reciprocity. I think it's reciprocity, where you have a country that charges a certain amount of money for visas, and therefore the other country also charges. So, for example, if your country charges Americans to come in $100 for their visas, then the other country will reciprocate and charge the same amount to your citizens. So you find it becomes very unattainable for poor countries or citizens from poor countries to go to these countries, because they're charging almost a similar amount as they're being charged. But what I also want to point out is the second point, which is many countries do have treaties and bilateral agreements across themselves. So you might find that while we are saying that it's not easy to travel within Africa, if you look at the West African countries, especially within ECOWAS, they can travel within each other without necessarily having any visa restrictions. We've seen that in the East African community. We've seen that in the SADC region. There are all these treaties that can be signed and that can be negotiated in order to allow citizens to move from one part of the world to the other. What I would like us to do is probably to focus and bring this kind of discussion and articulate it to a level where we either sensitize our own governments and through the AU to start negotiating very hard on how the citizens in Africa can travel to some of the destinations outside Africa. And that can only be done when you have the critical mass. So, for example, there could be a criteria that would say that if you're traveling from any of the African countries and you have a specific amount of either financial statement that you can show, then you can be allowed to enter into some of these countries without necessarily having to incur those high, that high amount of visas that we see many of the African countries or African passport holders incurring. But again, there is also the issue around what your country has, because the behaviors of some of the countries, especially when it comes to political stability, how they treat their citizens, also determine how these other countries will either allow your citizens in with the restrictions that they provide. The last point that I wanted to mention is our personal way of how we deal with issues, especially when you're traveling. Because I myself have been in a career where I've traveled to a number of countries. I worked in a career where I used to travel to roughly about 52 countries in probably within a year and so forth. And you learn quite a bit. And I think one of the issues that has made it, that I learned out of various travels, is the just taking your time to understand the country you're trying to visit. And I would urge, and I've heard people arguing that there's no need of even learning the language. I did not know this language, therefore I just talk my own language. I wouldn't want to go with that attitude. I'm sorry to say that. But the point is, just learn the language. Try and learn a few words. Try and learn just even how to say hello. Try and learn how to say some few words. And those few words will open up doors for you very, very, very much. I remember there was a time I was in Japan, and just because I tried very hard to learn Japanese, it was very easy for me when I think I'd missed a train, or I missed a train and I didn't know exactly where I was trying to go. And just by saying a few words, you can get a lot of help from the streets. It was the same case when I was in Cameroon. I was sick in Cameroon, and just because I learned a little bit of French, the hospital that was treating me, many of the people there spoke French, and it helps. So therefore, the understanding of the culture and learning the culture is so important, because it opens up that communication, the trust, and the assistance that you require, especially when you reach the borders. The other issue is also to understand the culture of the country. There's some countries that are very conservative, especially when you go to continental India and others, and even in the Arabic states. These countries are very conservative, so you cannot go in and start even in Thailand, for example, you've got to go in and become very, very aware of what that country means. So anyway, so the point that I'm trying to raise here is that we have issues that are what we call anecdotal issues, which are personal issues that we've experienced. But I would say, understand the country, take time, buy a book about the country, read a little bit of the history of the country before you visit the country, and just learn a few words if you don't know the language. And then more importantly, we need to sort of use this energy that we have and the frustrations that we are expressing here to turn it into an effort for good by pushing our governments through their legal system, pushing through the African Union to make sure that we negotiate stronger bilateral relationships that can enable our people to travel to these countries without the hindrances. Just take this example, and I just want this example to sink in. Dangote, who is one of the richest person in Africa, has to have nearly 9 visas to travel from some of the countries in Africa from one point to the other. And this is somebody who is the richest person in the continent. That tells you quite a lot about Africa. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That Dangote experience is wild. I remember reading about it. It was in the BBC, and it's the Nigerian passport. I think you have access to 50 countries, and this is obviously someone who travels to so many countries. So obviously his passport is full of visas. I don't know how we're going to involve our governments and the AU to change the status, but as it is right now, like Mutua said earlier, we have to work with what we have. Don't be scared of traveling the continent or even outside the continent. If you can't start collecting stamps, especially if you're traveling as a tourist, just start collecting stamps within countries that are visa-free for your country. And then when you start applying for visas, they can see this is someone that has traveled before, and it might make it easier for you to get visas. Thank you so much, Dr. Martin.